Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best champions for the lower elos. So I decided that I would update this list mainly because the season is coming to a close in the next month or so. So if you are trying to get to gold or just get to silver or improve your rank by the end of the season, then I would definitely recommend trying out one of these champions that I have on my list because I think that they are definitely the best for the lower elos right now. So with that being said guys, let's get into the video. So I am going to be doing it in the format where I'm going to give my number one pick for every role, and then I'm also going to give one or two honorable mentions for each role. So we're going to start off with the support role here, and my number one pick for support is going to be Zyra. Now Zyra is just such a strong support for the lower elos, mainly because of her laning phase. People just do not know how to lane against Zyra, and the way you beat Zyra in the laning phase is like playing a strong all-in support like an Alistar that can just like jump on her and burst her really quickly. But in the lower elos, a lot of players aren't going to do that, and they're just going to get poked down by Zyra in the laning phase, and she's just going to allow her AD carry to get a really large CS lead. And once it does get to the mid to late game as Zyra, you can deal so much damage and you can carry your team. Sometimes you'll even deal like the most damage on your team when you are playing support Zyra. And the two honorable mentions are going to be Brand and Vel'Koz. So Brand and Vel'Koz are very similar to Zyra in the sense that they are damage support champions. I would try to stay away from the more passive support champions like Janna or Soraka or Sona if you are in the lower elos, mainly because if your team falls behind or if you fall behind with those champions, it's going to be very hard for you to carry that game. Whereas if you're playing someone like a Brand or a Zyra, then you're pretty much guaranteed to win the laning phase as long as you do play it correctly, and as long as you can hit your skill shots in the laning phase and poke the enemy AD carry out or the enemy support out. And then once it does get to the mid to late game, you're gonna have the damage with those champions, and you're going to be able to carry your team even if they end up feeding. So I would definitely recommend trying out the damage supports if you have yet to, if you are in the lower elos. So moving over to AD carry now, my number one pick for AD carry is going to be Miss Fortune. So Miss Fortune is a great pick right now for pretty much all the elos, but I think that she's especially good for bronze and silver, mainly because she does have her ultimate, which is just such a strong ability. And if you can hit one good ultimate with Miss Fortune, it doesn't really matter if you're behind or if you're ahead with her. One good ultimate in like a mid to late game team fight could end up winning your team the game. It just does so much damage, and it just shreds pretty much anyone, because if you do go for the Youmu's into Black Cleaver into Duskblade, then you're gonna have a lot of armor pen and you're just gonna deal so much damage in team fights with her. So I would definitely recommend Miss Fortune as like your high priority AD carry pick. The honorable mention for AD carry is going to be Jinx. So the main reason I have Jinx here is because lower elo games do tend to usually last a little bit longer than higher elo games, and therefore leaning towards like a stronger late game AD carry is definitely not a bad thing to do, and Jinx is arguably one of the best late game AD carries. I feel like Jinx is just a really well-rounded AD carry pick right now for all elos, but for bronze and silver, if the game does reach like the 35 to 40 minute point, if you can just be able to position decently in team fights, and if you can keep your fishbones out and just be dealing those AoE crits with your rockets in team fights, you're going to be able to carry your team pretty easily. Once you do get to that 3 item spike on Jinx, that's when she really starts to deal a lot of damage, and usually games do last that long in bronze and silver, so there really should be no reason to why you won't get to that power spike, or there will be very few games to where you don't get to that power spike. So I think that Jinx is just a really good AD carry along with Miss Fortune. Now the number one spot for mid lane here is going to be Annie. So if you ask anyone, they're probably going to put Annie at their number one spot or very high up on their list for the best low elo champions. Annie is just like the signature champion for the lower elos because she doesn't really have any skill shots. I guess you could say her ultimate and her W are skill shots. They're very easy skill shots to land though, and Annie is just such a simplistic champion. What you want to do in team fights as her is just look for that flash stun Tibbers. If you can get that off and you can hit that consistently, then your job is pretty much done with Annie. As long as you can blow up the enemy AD carry or just look for that nice AoE stun in a team fight, then you're going to do really well in her, and that's one of the main reasons why I think she's a great pick for the lower elos. Now the honorable mentions for mid lane are going to be Katarina and Victor. Now you guys might disagree with the Victor pick here, but I'm going to explain why I think he is actually a pretty good pick for the lower elos. So he's kind of like Jinx in the sense that games do usually last a little bit longer in the lower elos, and even though Victor is a little bit harder to play, his burst combo is fairly simplistic. You go for the EQ ultimate, and if you can get that on a squishy target or on the enemy AD carry in a team fight, then like Annie, your job is done, and as long as you can burst a target or one-shot a target in a team fight, then you're going to do pretty well on Victor. He's also got great wave clear in his kit with his E, which will allow you to stall games out longer. If your team falls behind in the early game, then Victor can just stall out a game for a pretty long time. As long as he does get his Hex Core upgraded and he can get that wave clear, he can one-shot away with his E, so it makes him a really good pick for the lower elos as well. Now as for Katarina, she's always been known as one of the best low elo stomper champions. If the enemy team doesn't really have a lot of CC, or they just don't know how to use their CC correctly in a team fight, then you're going to be able to get those resets, deal a lot of damage, and you'll probably end up getting like triple kills and quadra kills almost every single game with Katarina. I would highly recommend picking her if the enemy team doesn't have a lot of crowd control. Even if they do have a little bit of crowd control, as long as you can choose the right time to go in during a team fight as Kat, then you can clean up team fights really well. And she is also an easier mid lane champion. She's not like the hardest mid lane champion to play, so that's another reason to why she's a good pick for bronze and silver. Taking the number one spot for the jungle is going to be Zac. So the main reason why Zac is on the number one spot, or at the number one spot, is because he does have really strong engage with his elastic slingshot, and players in the lower elos like the AD carries and the mid lane champions or the mid lane players, they usually don't have the best positioning compared to like the higher elo players obviously, so that just allows Zac to really punish that, and it allows him to just get on them really easily in team fights. If you can hit your E on the enemy AD carry in a team fight and just get onto that back line, then they're really not going to be able to do anything in a team fight, because they're going to have to run away from you, and they're not going to be able to attack anyone else during a team fight. So I think that because Zac has just really strong engage, and because he can definitely surprise the opponents with how long the range is on his Z, I think he is a great pick for the lower elos. Now the two honorable mentions for jungle are going to be Amumu and Skarner. So the two main reasons, or one of the main reasons to why these champions are on this list, is because they are both fairly simplistic champions, and they both have like one main objective in team fights. With Amumu, it's to bandage toss in, get that AoE ultimate off. If you can do that consistently, then you're going to be able to carry pretty hard as Amumu. And as for Skarner, your main objective is to try to flash in, get your ultimate off on the enemy AD carry or mid lane champion, and if you can do that, then you're probably going to do quite well on Skarner. Both of these champions scale really well into the late game too, so because games tend to last a little bit longer in the lower elos, then you're going to do really well on these champions most games. And last but not least, taking a look at the top lane now, my number one pick is going to be Kennen. So Kennen is a really good pick for any elo right now. I think he's especially strong for the lower elos though, mainly because he's kind of like Zac in the sense that he does a really good job at punishing enemy positional errors, and because players usually tend to make more positional errors in the lower elo, then Kennen can just easily flash Protobelt into a team fight, get an AoE ultimate off, and as long as he can do that consistently, hit it on the enemy AD carry or mid lane champion, then you're going to be able to carry really hard with Kennen. He's got great team fight as well, one of the best team fight top lane champions, so as long as you don't fall behind in the early game as Kennen, and as long as you can go even, then the chances of you carrying that game are going to be very high. Now the two honorable mentions are probably not champions that you would expect to be on this list, but it's going to be Jarvan and Tryndamere. So I think that Jarvan is very underrated right now for the top lane, and I would recommend going for more Assassin Jarvan than Tank Jarvan. Assassin Jarvan actually has a really strong all-in, and people don't expect the damage that he can do. Once you do it level 6 as Jarvan, or even when you hit level 2, you can all-in really nicely as long as you can hit your EQ combo. I would actually actually recommend taking Ignite on Jarvan top lane, because in the lower elos, teleport really isn't the best for top lane because you're not going to be able to use it as effectively and as efficiently as you would in the higher elo. So taking Ignite will allow you to get a snowball going really nicely. And with Jarvan, if you are playing up against a squishier top lane champion, then look to poke them down a little bit with your Q at level 1, and then go for that all in at level 2, pop the Ignite on them, and the chances of you getting that kill are going to be very high. Now, as for Tryndamere, I usually don't recommend this champion, but I've kind of changed my mind on him a little bit. I think that he is a great pick for the lower elos, or he's a better pick for lower elo than he is for higher elo, mainly because he does either have the option to split push or to team fight, and in the lower elos, people usually don't tend to, or they don't know how to deal with a split pushing champion as much as, or as well as they would like in the higher elo. So when you are playing Tryndamere, if you do get ahead in the early game, then you can likely 1v2 because of your ultimate and because of the amount of damage you do. So if you just split push top lane and like take the enemy's towers down, then you're going to get your team a pretty nice gold lead, and your team is probably going to be pretty far ahead. He can also team fight decently, because if you got like full build on Tryndamere and you go for an E flash in on the enemy AD carry in a team fight, 2 autos is probably going to kill the enemy AD carry if you are going crit Tryndamere. So I do think that he is a fairly decent pick because he can either split push, he can team fight pretty effectively as well, and he can definitely apply a lot of pressure around the map. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you are trying to get out of bronze or silver or even gold, I would definitely recommend trying out any of these champions. I think that there are definitely more champions than the ones that I've mentioned on this list, but I think that these ones are definitely the best, and they will give you the best chance to carry if you know how to play them. So with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.